Good morning, everyone. This is Martin Comtois, MC Starman. I'm in Duncan on beautiful Vancouver Island, and I have my friend Tamara Segal from Hawthorne Herbal, and she is in Prince Edward County in Ontario, and we're doing some cross-pollination of astrology and herbalism. I called it an alchemy of astrology and herbalism.
That's a good name.
How are you doing, my dear?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. We're in a new season here, so it's feeling hopeful as the sap rises in the trees here in Ontario. We're tapping trees and drinking sap and making syrup and feeling really grateful for that and getting ready to get gardens going and starting to harvest different plants for medicines as we do as the season picks up. So yeah, things are
In
going.
contrast to that, our garlic is up and I have 2 beds of greens planted already.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. Yeah, you're ahead of us. We
Well,
have teeny
my
tiny
lettuce
little garlic, like wow.
my lettuce is this big
Amazing.
already.
Oh, life on Vancouver Island.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Paradise. It's still a little cold, but we get away with having, our gardens started a little earlier than you guys, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
You must be planting seeds and germinating seeds, or do you put everything in the ground directly?
No, we've got shelves of seedlings started, and so it's all feeling fertile and young and vulnerable, and the new seeds, so much hope and potential, and so much vulnerability. When those little seedlings come up, they need really extra care. I have to be careful how I water them so they don't get squashed or drowned or
Yeah, no, and you don't want them to get too leggy either. It's a really important
right.
yeah, well, just to make you jealous further, I'm just as I'm looking outside the window here, I see the swans in the bay, and we have cherry blossoms and plum blossoms,
Wow.
and the trees are budding. The maple tree is just about to have leaves, so we're a bit ahead of you.
Yes, you are, for sure, for sure. So, well, but we're enjoying the process. The tapping season, the sap season is pretty special. So, we will be patient for when the
Well, I'm
blossoms
jealous
come and
that
all that
you
stuff.
get to have syrup water, and I mean maple water and maple syrup.
Mm.
What an amazing abundance.
We live in an abundant place. This country we live in is abundant, and this earth we live on is abundant. So I'm just trying to really continue to remind myself of that and find the gratitude in all the places as it comes up every day.
Right, right. How cool.
So
We wanted to
yeah.
talk about the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, and then I mentioned to you a book by Alexander Ruperty, Cycles of Becoming, and how important planetary cycles are, transits, and then so now we're looking at a Jupiter Neptune conjunction, and a little bit later on I'll share the chart for the new moon that's coming up, because this new moon, I have it on the table here. We have four planets in conjunction at the new moon. So the moon, the sun, Mercury, and Chiron. Then we have a
All in
Jupiter,
Aries.
all in Aries, yeah. And then we have a Jupiter Neptune conjunction, which has been getting a lot of press, and I think both of us have discussed this before, And now that it's becoming really close, we're kind of feeling it, huh? And in a
Yes.
more interesting way. And then we have the Venus Mars Saturn conjunction. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 conjunctions for this new moon. So
So we were going to talk about conjunctions. What's the deal with the conjunction and what does it mean? And what can we perceive in general when we have two or more planetary bodies aligning side by side in the same place in the sky? What does that mean
that's
for us?
beautiful. That's beautiful question. Nicely formulated. Well, there's two things, right? There's a natal astrology in your own personal chart when you have a conjunction, at what stage that conjunction is, where the conjunction is, whether it's applying. So you have a planet that's coming to meet another planet. So it's an applying conjunction. And then if it passes the other planet, then it's elongating. It's moving away. Forgot the exact terminology for that, but so those are important. And whether the conjunction is within 1 degree, so if the conjunction is within 1 degree, especially of the sun, you have a combustion. And then if you have the conjunction within 17 degrees, you have a cazimi, which is the super exalted conjunction. But the cazimi is burning up. I think that I need to brush up on my terms there, but those are classical astrology terms. So then the conjunction, so if you have a conjunction in your own chart, then these two planets, they work together in a way that no other aspects really happen. We have squares, we have sextile, we have oppositions. These are all different phases of a cycle. The cycle meaning that two planets have a cycle. They come in a conjunction, they go to the first quarter, to the opposition, to the last quarter, back to conjunction. When two planets come together, that is the beginning of the cycle, but it's also the end of the cycle too. So that's why conjunctions are so important, is because they represent, on one side, a death. We actually, that whole cycle we've been through, like this Jupiter Neptune conjunction, is the end of a cycle. It is a 14-year cycle. Jupiter went square, opposite, square, and now it's returning to conjunction with Neptune. And that's this cycle of becoming book by Alexander Ruperti. He looks at all the cycles, all the planets, and their cycles with each other. And really important book. One of the, in my library, is one of the books that I refer to the most, because it gives you an idea of what happens. Alexander Ruperti was a humanist astrologer, follower of Dane Rudyard. He was French. He has a number of books in French and only one in English, Cycles of Becoming. And that came from a tour that he made in the States in 1974 to 76, somewhere down that way. He just spent some time, really influenced astrology, really importantly. That book is very important. But anyway, so we have these cycles. So then when the planet comes close, there's a dying going on, just like when the moon comes towards the sun. That's always a difficult period. And then the conjunction, the exact conjunction, you have the combustion, where the moon actually gets combust, and we have that really dark, the novilunium that the alchemists called about, something very dark about the new moon. And then boom, within a day and a half, 2 days, we have the crescent moon, and now the moon is visible, and that's the rebirth. That's always very positive energy on the other side. So it's the same
Right.
thing with a planet. Jupiter comes in, getting real dark, really difficult. Then the conjunction happens, and then there's the release of energy, and then the planet moves on the other side. And now we're beginning a new cycle. You were
Right.
talking.
So,
Go ahead.
sorry.
Go ahead.
So I like this comparison to the moon cycle because it really simplifies the concept of the cycling of planets and the idea that we are working in these cycles on various levels. So we have, for example, we can take it even more minute in terms of the length of the cycle and talk about the day and night cycle, right? So you have the sun coming up in the sky at the beginning of the day. It's going to move through and reach its pinnacle at noon. It's going to set at sunset, and then it's going to disappear, and we're going to have midnight until it comes around again and a new day is born. Well, when that new day is born, it is the end of night. And so whatever was happening at night, whatever, life, dreams, whatever, that comes to an end. And we let go of, we wake up in the morning, the sun's coming up, wherever we were in dream space goes away. And now we're in waking life and we're in the daytime. And then later again that night, it's like the death of the day, whatever we were experiencing and carrying with us, and whatever we move into sleep, into dream space, and that comes to life. And so we have this birth, death, rebirth cycle each day. And then within the month, we have the new moon where the sun and the moon are conjunct side by side. We have the cycle of the moon, like you said, a few days later becoming a crescent, and then it becomes full, which is like noon, middle of the day, but it's in the moon cycle where it's exactly opposite from the sun, and they're reflecting each other, and they're the moon is reflecting the sun's light, and so we get that bright moon, and all this energy is released, and then it moves all the way through until it comes all the way back around, and they're conjunct again now in a new sign. So the chart that you have there is of the upcoming new moon, which will be in the sign of Aries. And we have just last week, we had the full moon, which was taking place when the sun was in Pisces, and it hadn't moved yet into Aries, which meant the full moon was opposite the sun in Pisces. It was on the other side in Virgo. But now, as it comes around, it's going to meet the sun in the sign of Aries. So it's going to be a death and a rebirth, because this cycle has ended and now we're moving into a new cycle. And it's interesting that it's also, in a way, we've gone through this cycle of death and rebirth, moving from the sun moving from the sign of Pisces into Aries, because the end of the zodiac cycle is Pisces. And now with the spring equinox, the sun moved into Aries, and we're actually starting the whole wheel again. It's like the dawn of the year. It's springtime. It's like right on the horizon, Aries. It's like right where, the sun is rising into a new season. And so this theme of death and rebirth with the conjunction is showing up with the moon cycle. It's showing up with the movement of the sun from Pisces into Aries. And it's showing up also on a bigger scale with the transit of Jupiter having moved all the way around the circle of the zodiac, which took like 14 years to get back to where it is now lined up, or almost lining up. It's coming into, right? To be lined up directly with Neptune in the sign of Pisces. And can you point out to us there those two, just on your board? Oh, or you could do it on the shared screen. But you've got this
So
beautiful board behind you, so I was thinking you could show
yeah,
us.
no, I can work on the board, but you were talking about, so the moon, the
There's the
sun,
sun.
going through, and so, and then the moon, and then the Jupiter, Neptune, and so you can see how many conjunctions we're going through right now. All these 4 planets are in conjunction, and then you talked about the sun coming into 1 to 0 degrees of Aries. That's the equinox. So
Right.
we have the beginning of the
Right.
new year, and so everything is becoming, everything is new. There's a fresh start in Aries, and then we have a sun, moon, Mercury, Chiron, quadruple conjunction in Aries. So there's a really powerful beginning. And so you were saying, that we look at the moon, right? So the moon moves away. The moon takes 28 days to go around the zodiac. So then 28 days it returns. So that's the beginning of the cycle. Now, each planetary alignments has a cycle that is the same. So then, for example, right now we have a Sun Chiron conjunction. So the sun moves to Chiron, and then it will be the Sun Chiron square, the Sun Chiron opposition in the fall, and then the Sun Chiron square at the end of fall. And so same thing with Jupiter Neptune, same thing with Venus Mars, same thing with Venus Saturn. So this is a very unusual chart. And you were explaining when we were chatting before getting together, about how difficult and how optimistic you were about the Jupiter Neptune conjunction, and how you were surprised because you have your sun here, right? Or somewhere around middle of Pisces, right?
Closer to the end. Yeah, closer to the end of Pisces. 25 degrees, I have it.
Oh, and then I have my Venus at 26 degrees.
Right. So we have the sun and Venus conjunction, you and I.
Exactly. So then that Jupiter Neptune conjunction falls right on our Venus and Sun conjunction. But we also have, I have my sun at the beginning of Pisces, and I have my Mercury. So, right where you're anyway. So we have a lot of Pisces planet. So
we do.
So what was your feet? So you were pretty enthusiastic, and then you kind of felt a little bit depressed. So let's talk about what a Jupiter Neptune conjunction. I think that's what the big question is, we've been looking at this coming up. I know I've been talking about it for months now, about that Jupiter Neptune conjunction. And archetypally, what does that feel to you, a Jupiter Neptune conjunction?
Yes, right. Well, so you have these beautiful crystal balls representing Jupiter and Neptune. Which one is it the green one there? That's Neptune? That's Neptune?
Jupiter. No,
that's
Neptune
Jupiter.
Neptune is amethyst.
Neptune's amethyst. Okay.
And then Jupiter is a big green, so I have fluoride. But
fluoride for Jupiter. Okay, beautiful. So there's the two, fluoride and amethyst, Jupiter and Neptune together in the sign of Pisces. I was anticipating this connection for a long time, partially because, yes, I have a lot of planets in Pisces, including my sun, as you do. So we identify a lot with the Piscean energy, but also Neptune is the ruling planet of Pisces, and Jupiter is the ruling planet of Pisces. These two planets are the ones that really resonate with the sign of Pisces when they are transiting through the sign of Pisces. They're kind of, I perceive them as being more empowered. They're able to express their energies in stronger and generally, I would say, more healthy ways. It's like, being in the environment that's most supportive for you when you're like, let's say, or I will say, okay, when I'm at the beach and the waves are coming in and out and I'm barefoot on the sand and I'm in the sun and I feel it on my skin and I don't have any responsibilities that day and I've just been in the water and now I'm out on the sand, I feel strong and healthy, and I'm going to be I'm going to make wise decisions, and I'm going to be compassionate, and I'm not feeling my anger or my jealousy or my stress because I'm in the environment where I feel really strong and supported. And so I can do things in a really good way. So Neptune transiting through Pisces, which it's so far away and it moves so slow from our perspective that it actually takes 15 to 20 years to move all the way through.
12 years Neptune takes to a sign.
Not as much, but it
160 years to go through the whole zodiac.
To go through the whole thing. Okay, so 12-ish years to move through the whole sign. So really long time. We've had this transit of Pisces of Neptune through Pisces for a very long time already. But that it's Neptune is expressing itself as Neptune in very strong ways. That's the way I see it. And Jupiter too it came into Pisces only a few months ago, kind of at the turn of the year or a little after that. And now it's in its ruling, like the sign that it rules as well. And it's also in its happy place. It's very strongly expressing itself and not getting caught up in its challenges, but more really being able to express itself strongly. Both of them, any kind of transit that they have, any aspect that they have in relationship with any other planets moving through the zodiac, they are going to sort of often have the upper hand. They're going to be able to express what they're expressing more strongly, more healthfully than anything else. So my expectation was that the transit of Jupiter through Pisces and eventually coming to meet up with Neptune, and Jupiter and Neptune now conjunct, the two of them together, both in the sign that they rule, this is going to allow for a lot of amazing stuff to happen because they are going to be able to express themselves in their power, and they have a lot of power. And so then, we can talk about, well, what is the energy? What is the power that they bring, and how does it come together?
Well, technically you're right, but again, there's the dying of the cycle, right? So then Jupiter hasn't come to Neptune right away yet. So
no, so it's moving. So that's an important point to remember. So they haven't come to conjunction yet. And actually, as Jupiter is moving towards Neptune, there is a death aspect of the whole cycle of the transit of Jupiter around the zodiac that is now dying. But even just going back to the characteristics of these planets, what is Neptune bringing? What is Jupiter bringing? So what's going on with as these planets come into conjunction in Pisces, like Neptune. You've done
a really good job of explaining that, I think. But I think, as you're saying this, I'm looking at the chart, and Neptune and Jupiter should be really, as you say, the most powerful planets in the chart. And in the sense they are. But if you look at the whole chart, you find that actually Saturn is more strong right now than Jupiter or Neptune. And I think that's why we haven't been feeling the Jupiter Neptune. So we have 4 planets in Aries Okay, so this is a technique called finding the dispositor or the final dispositor. So that's the ruling planet of the chart. So you look at sun, moon, Mercury, Chiron in Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. So you go to Mars, and Mars is in Aquarius ruled by Saturn. So Saturn is in an exalted position, and it rules the new moon, and it rules Venus and Mars, and it also rules Pluto, and it also rules Uranus, who is in the sign of Venus. Venus is in Aquarius. So that really Saturn rules all of the planets. Only Jupiter, Neptune are not ruled by Saturn. So that even though we should have this really Jupiterian, Neptunian kind of feeling, it's actually much more of a Saturnian feeling.
Okay.
You
I
know,
like it. That's an interesting, yeah, that's an interesting perspective and important, because Saturn is also in the sign of its rulership, and it's very strong right now in this other conjunction with Mars and with Venus. And so we see those three together in the sign of Aquarius.
And also we've been living through a Saturn Uranus square, so that Venus Mars, and I'll look at the chart again a little bit later, but that Venus Mars Saturn conjunction is in square to Uranus, and that's a lot of what we've been going through. So really the social situation, you know, is really tense. And the Jupiter Neptune is you know, so you wanted to explore the archetype of Jupiter Neptune and what Jupiter
Right.
Neptune feel like.
Right.
So Jupiter, you know, Jupiter transits, and Jupiter, when we study Jupiter, it always brings good luck and it makes everything bigger. The problem with Jupiter is that it's inflammatory. It brings about an inflation and makes everything bigger.
Uh-huh.
So
Inflation's a good word.
inflation is a difficult word,
Right.
especially in psychology. You know, we become inflated, you know, we become puffed up, we think more of ourselves. So Jupiter in a negative shadow way makes us think that we're really big.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's very difficult, you know. So, and then Jupiter in Pisces is the wise teacher. You know, so, you know, versus Jupiter in Sagittarius. Jupiter also rules Sagittarius. Jupiter in Sagittarius, it's the big adventurer. And
Right.
Jupiter in Pisces is the wise teacher.
Okay.
But I don't know if you've watched Sadhguru's been getting a lot of bad publicity, you know, recently. So that's a Jupiter in Pisces, you know, it's the inflation of the great wise teacher, you know. So that's, you know, a problem. On the positive side, Jupiter is the faith and hope and the enthusiasm to really follow, to dream big. This is what I want to become, you know. So Jupiter sets the tone for, you know, so Jupiter in my chart tells me about what my aspirations and hope and enthusiasm and faith, you know, what do I believe in? That's all Jupiter. And so it plays a really important role in my psychic economy in terms of my enthusiasm, my hopes, I used a really quick sentence. What is it that I want to be when I grow up? That's
Right.
Jupiter. When I
Right.
become at the
When I
top of my
grow
game,
up.
I don't want to grow down.
No.
Saturn is I want to grow down,
Right.
master, just stay within, you know, Jupiter wants to grow up.
Right.
Saturn is the discipline that one needs, so that's why we were talking about, when Saturn moves into Pisces in 2023, that's going to be a much different phase, Jupiter moving through Pisces as this feeling, but then Saturn is ruling Aquarius. So really the Saturnian, when Saturn moves into Pisces, all of a sudden it will be ruled by Jupiter. So that will be much, much different energy. So we'll look at that shift. But so even though we should be all feeling Jupiterian, we're actually feeling Saturnian. We're actually feeling depressed and just like limited and so that's Jupiter. Neptune is a very interesting archetype because there's a beautiful book, the Quest for Redemption by Liz Green. Neptune, the Quest for Redemption. It's probably the best book that she's ever written in terms of how detailed and well written it is. So many myths and stories, and she does incredible charts, and then she gives a complete detail of all the aspects to Neptune. And so Neptune, the quest for redemption. What does that mean, the quest for redemption? It's the looking for the sacred container of the great mother. It's the embrace of not the mother herself, it's the embrace of the great mother, or the embrace of the divine. The whole Christian ethos of seeking redemption for our sins, I'm human, I'm sinful, I want to be saved, from evil. I want to be contained in the baptism water, in the baptism fountain, in the mercurial fountain of the alchemist. It's this wanting to experience divine connection. And if I can have that divine connection with a bottle of scotch or a tab of acid, then okay. Or even the couch potato who merges into the TV, or the great lover who mirrors everything that I am, or makes me feel so good that I feel this experience of Neptunian love, which is much different than Piscean love, And so that Neptune, Pisces, so then Jupiter, Neptune, and Pisces, we start to see what are the different combinations and what that means. I mean, it's very spiritual, but we can't forget again that all of these charts here have been ruled by Saturn. And so then the Saturn archetype plays a big role. Now, in terms of Jupiter, Neptune in history, it has I did a little bit of a study there of looking at all of the conjunctions of Jupiter and Neptune in the last 100 years. And what I found is that at the end of World War I, Jupiter and Neptune were in conjunction. At the end of World War II, Jupiter and Neptune were in conjunction.
Interesting.
Yeah. 1972, end of Vietnam War. The 1988, I think 1988. Also, some really important alignments of Jupiter, Neptune. So 2009 was the last one. And so 90, so I don't have all of those right in front of me right now, but it has a kind of a real redemptive quality. There's there's a return to spirituality, there's a return, you know, you get a sense of a renewal of our commitment, you know. And it's interesting how it's manifested as despair. It's a deep longing for a spiritual experience that is simply not available in the material world. You know, so then that Jupiter Neptune, you know, in the light of that Saturn Uranus square, which is so difficult, we live such in difficult times. So then that would explain, you know, kind of that depressive energy that we've all been feeling.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I don't know how how everybody's been feeling. It is fairly nuanced with all the, you know, there's lots going on, and the way that it affects everybody's individual charts. But in terms of the depression, yeah, there's just a bit of a heaviness, a bit of a sense of, oh, I can't, it's not, I don't know. I think the feeling of certain things are leaving, there's a death and a rebirth happening. I think that's part of it. And so and the qualities that you were describing of, you know, Neptune really merging things together and reflecting and wanting to find redemption, wanting to have something that supports you for the being that you are, despite all the human shortcomings that you have and all the challenges of day-to-day life. Because that something is, you know, we can think of it as, you know, like the spirit, the all-encompassing sort of, you know, light that all of us are. And we came from, you know, maybe we came from that light and we chose to manifest, or we were chosen, or however it happened, we manifested as physical human bodies having a physical experience. And yet we come from this place that is light, that is everything. And so there's room for us to be whatever we are, and there's no judgment, and it's always changing, and it's so many things at once. And so Neptune, you know, is about us recognizing all of that. And some of that shadow aspect can come up as a, you know, where we're looking for a partner that's just mirroring who we are, and we're not necessarily growing through our relationship, or like moving into addictive behaviors that will allow us to reach some sense of melding with like something out there, and kind of letting go of not feeling so much in our physical bodies, you know, because that's heavy and it's hard and there's challenges. And so all of these are aspects of Neptune. It's so complicated to think about, even because it's so much about wanting to merge with everything. And so I, in a human body with this brain, can't really think about it, you know, without kind of merging with all of that stuff. And Jupiter, the expansive one, the one that wants to just grow, and also to access all of this wisdom, Jupiter in Pisces really accessing like a spiritual wisdom, it connects with Neptune. And yet it also expands this idea of wanting to be out of the body, wanting to be something bigger than what we are on this human level, wanting to meld with everything and everyone else. And so it makes it harder to exist on the physical, on the day-to-day. It allows for it's open to the dream space, because like it's, you know, it's so much bigger and expansive and lighter, and Jupiter really brings lightness, and it allows us to reach these ethereal places, but it's harder to bring them in, to ground them. And actually maybe a feeling of depression can come from like kind of being forced to come down to ground somehow.
Well, that's
Uh,
that
that's the
Saturnian,
Saturn.
that's that Saturnian thing. But what you were saying, about, and I think it's good to know, so, we got the Jupiter Neptune conjunction is coming, but as you pointed out, Neptune has been in Pisces for the last 10 years or so.
Right.
And to me, that is a lot about, and prior to the crisis we're living through, we could see that people were in a kind of a Neptunian state of just, what we call the sheeple, the people who just kind of in this Neptunian world of wanting to be contained. In Liz Green's book on Neptune, she talks about the political Neptune. The political Neptune is wanting to be embraced by my country as the divine master or the divine lover. So so Neptune in Pisces, we have absolute trust in our government. We have absolute trust in something, whether it's my lover or my astrology practice or my, whatever it is, my spiritual practice. We have this complete Neptunian surrender in Pisces. And so really, really hard to get to be defined psychologically with the Neptune in Pisces. And so, in Pisces, that's the struggle, how do I really become defined? So that's the lesson of Saturn. So Saturn comes into Pisces, we're going to really put to work these realizations that we're getting. The other thing that's really important to really understand, and we're going to feel a real shift of energy. So this spring, and let me explain that. So we have Jupiter is moving towards the conjunction and has been, Jupiter came in last year into Pisces, turned retrograde, came back into Aquarius. I think we have to remember, we can go back a little bit to the beginning of 2021 when Jupiter and Saturn came into Aquarius together. So we had the Jupiter Saturn conjunction, which was a really important beginning of a new cycle of Jupiter and Saturn. The alchemists called that the maxima conjunctio, most important of conjunctions, because it sets a new social trend. So then Saturn is still in Aquarius, moving its way, and then so after the conjunction, Jupiter raced out, came into Pisces, and then turned retrograde. Was conjunction, Jupiter sat on my sun for 2 months last year and so your planet at 2 degrees of Pisces, Jupiter, station retrograde right on. So it was like there for like 4 weeks to, almost, for a long time. And then it turned retrograde, came back. And then now it's moving and it's speeding through. So Jupiter only spends 1 year in Pisces, and it's been getting closer and closer to Neptune. So beginning of April, 9 to the 12th, we have the exact conjunction of Neptune, Jupiter. My sense is that's going to be really important time to pay attention to. Then we have the full moon in Libra that comes after that, and then we have the eclipse season in Taurus that comes further after that. So spring's going to be very, very important. But what happens is Jupiter moves in to Aries, and Jupiter moving into Aries in the spring will really change the energy. And then Venus and Mars are following along. So then we'll have the Jupiter. This is going to be quite interesting. We'll have a Jupiter, Venus, Neptune conjunction this spring. and then they'll both move together into Aries, and then Mars will come into Pisces, and all of a sudden now things are feeling a lot more Piscean, because now Mars is ruling all the Aries planets, and it's now, so we'll have a mutual reception of Mars, Jupiter, leading to a Mars-Jupiter conjunction at the begin, in the middle of spring there during the eclipse season. And
Right. So because Mars is the ruling planet of Aries. So when we have all these planets moving into Aries, it's like Mars already has some dominion over them, even when it's not in an angle with them. And then it's making its way towards them. And it's like, oh yeah, Mars is kind of calling the shots here. Also, Mars moving into Pisces, it's interesting that you say, well, then we'll feel more of the Piscean energy, because, Mars is the activator. It gets things moving. It energizes. It's the spark plug. It's like, and so once that moves into the scene, we can actually energize and put into action maybe some of what's coming through as more dreamlike right now, where we have this, we're moving towards this conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune, and we might feel that more as time moves on. I think, the other thing is that, like we were talking about how when a planet's moving towards conjunction, it's a death phase, because it's the end of that cycle. So we're moving towards the end of this cycle of Jupiter. So we could think about the last time that Jupiter transited through Pisces, which was in 2011, I believe. Whatever was going on at that time, 2010, 2011, whatever was going on around that time, that was the beginning of a cycle that's coming to an end right now. And so that's part of what we're experiencing too in this time, is letting go of like allowing that cycle to complete, and then moving into this new phase of dreaming what might start to come into action more in the spring as Mars moves into Pisces and all these other planets move into the Mars ruled Aries of action. Jupiter, having been like dreaming with Neptune, is now moving into Aries and getting activated by all that Aries and that Mars energy, which seems kind of more exciting. It seems like, okay, well, things might happen. I mean, action can be wonderful, and it can also have its challenges, but it will move out of this stuff up here and more into, all right, let's get some muscles and some fire and some some movement happening. Let's motivate and energize. Right.
Well, with the overall tenor of the charts that we're seeing in the spring and in the summer and coming in the fall, I think that things are liable to get much more volatile. Mars in Pisces and a Mars Neptune conjunction, it has a bad reputation for being for victimization. I think that with Mars in Pisces and a Mars Neptune conjunction, Mars Neptune angles in the natal chart, one is in service to a mystical ideal. That's the light aspect of it. The shadow aspect, our will, Mars, feels victimized by the Neptunian. And so, with everything that's been going on since the crisis, and as we look at everything that's going on, my sense is that we're liable to see a lot of anger and a lot of victimization and a lot of frustration now we got this Jupiter Neptune thing, but when Jupiter moves into Aries and Mars moves into Pisces, then all of a sudden, and then Venus also comes into Pisces, and then the next the eclipse season is going to be in Taurus, ruled by Pisces. So what we're going to have is we're going to have the Jupiter Mars mutual reception ruling the chart. And so that's that's liable to be very, very aggressive, very pompous, very challenging. And so I think we're in a gestation period right now. Yes, we want to feel this Jupiter Neptune, and we're really all quite invested about it. But the reality is that we're living in a very Saturnian time, and we kind of anticipate and feel that we're not out of the woods yet. And I think that in a sense, 2022 is going to be more difficult, and already has proven more difficult than 2021 and 2020. And so that's kind of a somber prognosis, but of the astrology of the times. But really being well resourced and having a really good spiritual practice and creative practice. That brings us to a question that I would like to ask you is, so in the light of that Jupiter Neptune and what we talked about, what are you seeing in your clients? What are you seeing in yourself? And what are some of the things that you would prescribe for someone who is concerned about what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question, but things that come to mind, like so Neptune as a planet, like if we think about, like, I'm just thinking about Jupiter and Neptune within the realm of the physical body, and the way we would look at them in terms of medical astrology. So Neptune is it's so much about dissolving and everything becoming part of everything else. So the big struggle with Neptune is boundaries. It's the antithesis of boundaries. Interestingly, it's kind of an aside, but what you were talking about, how we want to trust completely in something. And so maybe that trust is in the government, which is an institution, and Neptune rules all these institutions. I always thought that's so weird that Neptune rules institutions. It rules, governments and schools and prisons, and like these are very straight and narrow,
it also rules media.
things.
It also rules
The media, because it rules the illusion. It rules the image rather than the physical, the actual thing. So all of these represent images of what we kind of subscribe to, and we decide this is how life is, even though it's all just an image. So the people that are in government, we only know what they share publicly, and whatever decisions are made, we know what they tell us publicly about that, but we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and we don't know about the humans that make up, the ones that make up these roles, and how they got into these roles, and the trust that people have been putting into these institutions on a lot of different levels is kind of coming into question right now. So that's a thing. But in terms of the physical body, it has to do with boundaries. So your boundaries are not as strong when there's a big Neptune influence. And that can mean that, very physically, it can mean there's opportunity for stuff to get in that shouldn't be there. You aren't telling the difference between what's you and what's not you well enough to keep stuff out. So infections can come in, all kinds of microbes can get in through whatever, through your skin, through your breath, your blood vessels, there's been all this talk with this whole crisis about, it seems to be through the blood that infection gets transmitted. And it's the blood that gets interfered with. So your blood vessels that channel the fluids of your body, the water, the blood, which is Neptune rules the water. Pisces is a water sign, and it has to do with the waters of the body a lot. So you need to make sure that those waters of your body, the blood, is going where it needs to go in a healthy way through the circulatory system, that it's not leaking out, that it's not getting clogged. And the blood vessels need to be strong enough to allow that proper passage. Neptune can influence that in a way where there's more permeability within the blood vessels. Stuff can get into the bloodstream that shouldn't, or there can be leakages, or there can be pooling and things like that. So that can be a challenge when Jupiter comes on the scene. Jupiter expands everything, right? And Jupiter, again, both of these planets, when they're in the sign of Pisces, they are expressing themselves generally in healthy ways. They're not tending to express their shadow side as much as they're expressing their healthy side, but their shadow side is still there, and it can be augmented depending on what's going on around it. So with Jupiter, it's expansive and it's light, and it's bringing a lot of opportunity for, it brings protection. It brings a sense of safety, of trust that everything's okay. So you can just dream what you want, and it'll probably manifest. And, and with Pisces, like connecting to wisdom, ancient wisdom, or, like more esoteric stuff, and bringing that in. But it also can, because it's so expansive, it can expand the properties of Neptune of losing boundaries and allowing other things to come in. And Jupiter in the body, when it's not expressing itself in a healthy way, is inflammatory, because it's that kind of expansion. And now you've got inflammation out of control, which we know is the cause of so many different health issues. So there can be inflammation of the thoughts, of the trust in maybe what we shouldn't necessarily be trusting in. There can be, we're seeing this conjunction in terms of our financial system. And that is, of course, liquid. It's very illusory. Money isn't really real. It's just, we all put our faith in it and decide this is how we engage. And so that's become really inflated. And we are starting, people are starting to think, oh, can I have the same faith in our economic system that I once did? Maybe not. So that allowing a lot of stress to come in, because if you don't feel secure financially, that's like probably one of the biggest stressors for most people. So there's that angle. And then if you're more stressed, it's harder on your immune system. You're more likely to take stuff in that you wouldn't otherwise, and there's more likely to be more of an inflammatory response on some level. So these are things that I'm seeing, in different ways showing up and possibly continuing. These are things that can manifest with this kind of transit. And how do we deal with that? Bringing in the Saturn, bringing in more grounding.
That's what I was going to say. The Saturn.
Bringing in more strengthening. Yeah. So Saturnian herbs that strengthen boundaries are really key. And there are different ones we would use on an energetic level or on a physical level. The one that really comes to mind is oak. Oak is Saturn medicine. The bark of oak with all these tannins, it strengthens, it keeps that bark really strong. It prevents infection from getting in. We brew wine in oak barrels because that's going to make sure that all those sweet grapes that all these microbes want, they won't be able to get at them, because the oak barrels protect and keep it so that this healthy fermentation can happen and you get nice wine instead of something kind of icky with all these different microbes, right?
So would you make a tea out of oak bark then?
Oak bark, yeah, can be, it's not the kind of thing that I would recommend that people do every day, because it's so strengthening and tightening to boundaries that it could it can make it so that you're not taking up nutrition. You don't have enough permeability in your, your gut or something. It could stop you up. It can make you constipated. But for somebody, yeah, in cases where everything, the boundaries are not good, there's more leaky stuff. So like,
So
for example, leaky blood vessels, like varicose veins or hemorrhoids, or like, like bulging blood vessels, oak either topically or sometimes internally as a tea, yeah, could work.
would you do a
Topically
smudge
infused.
too? Would you do a smudge of oak bark?
You could do a smudge of oak bark to protect yourself energetically. That's an interesting thought. Yeah, and like, or if you have like the runs, if you got like diarrhea, oak bark tea can really help. But you don't want to do it for more than just a few days, because in those cases, because it can have, opposite effects. But yeah, the oak is just kind of like the quintessential Saturnian herb, I think of. So even just going and sitting or standing with an oak tree, going and hugging it, getting an oak leaf and putting it, somewhere where you have it with you, drawing on that energy that way.
It's really fascinating because the old settlers here, they grew a whole lot of oak trees. They put oak everywhere. You go hanging around, and it's not indigenous to this area. But you go and you walk in the forest in Duncan, and people have planted oak trees everywhere. So walking in the oak forest, how interesting.
Yes, just spending time with the oak trees. And I last year I gave a herb walk at a center that hosts people for recovery, when like people that have been through sexual assault. And so it's a center where you can go on retreat and you get a lot of support, and it's in a beautiful place. And so I went with the staff there to do a herb walk, so that they could see some of the plants that are medicines growing on the land there, and they could maybe share that with some of the people that stay there, and that maybe I might go back when people are staying there at some point. They've been sort of functioning under the normal rate because of all the whole pandemic crisis stuff, right? So anyways, but at that land, there was this trail we were on, that when you got to the end of the trail, and then there was you had to turn either right or left, right there at the end of the trail, there was this big oak tree, huge old oak tree. And there was a bench underneath it. And as soon as you got to it, you just wanted to walk right up to it. And so I walked over to it, and I gave this tree a big hug, and I started talking to them about, the energy of oak. And they said, everybody that stays here is so drawn to this tree. They just, they'll get to the end of the trail, and then we'd see people sitting here a lot, just on the ground. So we decided we would put a bench here. So now people come and they'll sit on the bench and they'll journal, or they'll draw, or they'll just be there. And, the idea that the oak is this grounding, supportive force that helps you to feel your connection with the earth, and that you are of the earth, and that you are, that you're safe because you've got these boundaries around you. For somebody that's been through that kind of trauma, this is such important medicine. And just to have the time and the space to be there and sit with it can be medicine enough. And that is where the Neptune comes in, because you don't actually need to physically take something into your body and bring it to the physical in order to feel the effects of it. You can connect just energetically, and that can be really powerful. And Neptune accentuates that. So we have maybe in a way more access to do that right now. And Jupiter accentuates that even further, So that's that could be a good way to work with medicine at this time, is just to work energetically with it more than physically with it, because we are maybe more open to that with the conjunction of Jupiter and Neptune.
Interesting how I was thinking of an anecdote, a mythological anecdote of the oak tree being the tree of Wotan, so a Germanic Slavic tree influence, and we know that a lot of the colonizers came from, those countries, and also that these traditions used to plant an oak tree in the middle of their field
In the middle.
as in the middle of the field as a protection from Wotan and as a Saturnian. So they were actually altars to Wotan.
Ah,
And then that would have to be related to Saturn and Saturnus and Saturnalia. Interesting how the thread of mythology and herbalism and Germanic Slavic mysticism, how it
mhm.
really informs a lot of what we do, huh?
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And a friend of mine, another herbalist, Abra Arneson, she recently published a book kind of about this. It's about the mythology um, and basically of Europe with tying it into astrology and tying that into the plants. It's called the weaving plants, planets, and people. And so, yeah, it's just filled with these stories, these myths, which she then weaves into their connection to the planets, their connection to particular plants. And then themes of life as they move through these stories. So yeah, it's a lovely work that she basically put together through the lockdown times.
So you told us about oak bark. What other Saturnian, herbs and medicines? I know I've been drinking nettle tea, and
Uh-huh.
and I know that that's really important for me. And then we're going to pick nettle, and nettle has, stinging nettle. So stinging nettle, kind of as a protective. So would so what are other Saturnian antidote to this Neptunian? And I also wanted to say, part of what I saw in terms of prediction of the Jupiter Neptune conjunction. Personally, I see a lot of flooding. I see it as a flooding.
Right. You
I've
said that.
seen big flooding in France and in Australia, and
Mhm.
my sense is that we're going to see a lot of flooding through this early spring here. I think that anyway. But what
Mhm.
antidotes do you have? What Saturnian medicine would you recommend?
Right. Yeah. How do we dam up these floods? um, yeah, the flooding is an interesting thing to consider, and I think I feel like a good way to work with that, one of the best ways, is probably just to try to ally ourselves with the water and allow what needs to be cleansed to cleanse. And you know um, there's a certain amount of not fighting it, but letting it flow, because that's what it wants to do, as difficult as that might be. And it can bring about loss. But again, this is a big period of death and rebirth. And so for some people, there is big loss, which then means room for other big things you might not have ever imagined or brought about on your own. And yet this is what is meant for you in this life. So
Mhm.
yeah, so other Saturnian herbs, yeah, so you mentioned nettle. I mean, nettle, I don't particularly associate nettle with Saturn, other than the fact that nettle is very high in silica. And silica it's crystalline. It's pretty solid. Like in the body, it creates more solid structures. It will turn into calcium in the body, so it will strengthen the bones, which is Saturn, the physical solid structure of us. and it helps. It's mineral rich, and so like it's deeply mineral resourced, and so it does help to build the physical form. And so in that way, it's quite Saturnian, but because it brings so much prickle and heat and irritation, and then as part of that, it brings more blood to the area, and it also clears out the old. It's very cleansing, and then it stimulates the liver. It's got a lot of Mars going on. So nettle has a lot of, it's associated a lot with Mars, and nettle tends to be very cooling to the body, and it reduces inflammation. So it can be an antidote to the inflammation that it will initially cause when you get a sting from it, and the heat that you feel from that. Then later it'll cool it. So it's working on this axis of temperature, hot and cold, that Mars really works with.
Interesting with that Mars-Saturn conjunction, huh?
Yes, yeah, it could be a good balance of them. It'll be nettle season here well, I guess we're just starting nettle season here. I haven't harvested any yet, but yeah, as Mars and Saturn come into conjunction. So, yeah, any herbs that are astringent, so herbs that will tighten up and strengthen tissues, are gonna, I think of as being Saturnian. So, I think of a raspberry, like raspberry leaf, which is also very nutritious, and it feeds the whole structure, but it also is astringent. It tightens up, like it's really helpful for the blood vessels to help strengthen those blood vessel walls. It can be helpful if there's like leaky gut, or if there's like bleeding anywhere, like you can use it topically to stop the bleeding, because it'll just tighten up all those tissues. So that's another good one that can have a grounding effect. And you could think about a lot of the roots too, just using roots of herbs to bring some of that grounding effect. So things like dandelion, which dandelion root is a wonderful medicine. It's very nutritious, it's very cleansing, and it's bitter. And the bitter flavor has to do with Saturn too, because Saturn is, in addition to being about the structure and boundaries and such, Saturn is also about, existence in a physical body on the earth, and all the challenges that come with that, and how you have to go through those because you've chosen this experience, or you've been given this experience, whatever. You have to learn the lessons that life gives you, and there will be hardship, and you endure that. And then through enduring that, you become stronger, and you become wiser, and you're able to better manage your life. And so there's this bitterness with that. You have to taste the bitterness, and that's going to train you. And when you taste the bitterness, it physically, physiologically, it supports your digestive process and allows you to much better make use of the nutrients that you eat, and cleanse out what you don't need, and do everything in a timely manner. Very Saturnian. Do everything on time. Get rid of what needs to leave. Take in and make good use, efficient use of what you get. And you're going to have to taste some bitterness in order to do that. And that's part of the process. So dandelion root brings you that bitterness. It brings you the nutrients. It's got this earthy connection, being in the ground. And so that can be really helpful for people that are feeling a harder time kind of coming into their physical body. Or sometimes for people that are feeling stifled and depressed, which in the late winter moving into spring, you sometimes feel that. And there's a physiological thing where your liver is stagnant because, you just haven't been moving around as much, and you haven't been eating as much fresh food and all that stuff. It can be a good time to cleanse. Well, you could just cleanse by having dandelion root tea that will stimulate your liver and help to clear it and get it moving more. And once that happens, you get more momentum going. You don't feel as stagnant. So you might feel less frustrated and less depressed, more ready to take on the new season instead of feeling like, fuck it,
That's
Yeah.
really, really, really good information. I want to ask you about Devil's Club.
Oh, Devil's Club. Special place in my heart for that plant. And
Well, I have a a little piece of,
Oh, Devil's Club.
and I also it was given to me by a native person, and I have a branch of Devil's Club above the driver's seat in my car for
Oh,
protection.
nice. For the
So
protection, for the journey. Yeah, Devil's Club is really has a strong spiritual element, and yet it also is very energizing for the physical. It's in the same family as ginseng. So some of the properties of ginseng you can think of with Devil's Club. And you know, we don't have Devil's Club here, except that I planted some in our woods last spring that was sent to me by a herbalist in the Kootenays in BC. So I do have a little bit growing, but it's not native to this area, and I'm just hoping that it will do okay in these woods. Like so far it's been okay. It's quite hardy, it's quite strong, but it's not, I've definitely never come across it here. So when I used to live on Vancouver Island, and that was when I started really seriously working with herbs more, then I learned about Devil's Club, and it was one of the herbs that I worked with. And then when this friend sent me these plants to plant last year, I took some of the rootstock and made a bit of medicine from it. So I have a bit of like cherished Devil's Club tincture from that right now. So it's, you know, you can think of it as a bit of an adaptogen, which means like ginseng's an adaptogen too. It means that it helps you to adapt physically, physiologically, also mentally, energetically to whatever challenges you're facing. So you could adapt to having to be out like in extreme cold for a long time, or having to hike really far, or carry a lot of heavy things, or to manage the stresses of you've got a whole bunch of tasks in your day-to-day life. It was traditionally taken on hunting expeditions, and it would allow people to be out for many days with maybe a limited amount of food and still have all of their sensory abilities strong enough that they could tune into what they, you know, to their hunting, and be able to catch stuff and then make it back. And so it was used for that. I believe there's a spiritual component to it, in that it's a pretty strong spirit, Devil's Club. It's got intense thorns, spikes on the branches, and it grows in these clusters. And so when you come across it in the forest, there can be a sense of like, oh, I don't think I'm going to go another step towards these plants. Although my experience with them is that despite that, they've been quite friendly to me. I've been able to be in a patch of them and not get hurt by them, and have just this sense of respect that they could be very painful. But so there's a protective element there, and the fact that they're energizing like this, it's another Mars characteristic, you know.
well, it's also as a Saturnian, you know, because Saturn, you know, is the devil. You know, Saturn, the archetype of Saturn has, you know, it has a cloven foots, you know, he has as that's the feet of the goat, you know, it's the goat. Saturn is the goatfish, right? And so, I mean, Capricorn ruled by Saturn is the goatfish, you know, and so the goat, you know, the you know, the symbolism of the goatfish, right? It says depth, you know, that tail of a fish, so it can swim in the depth, but it wants to climb to the heights, you know. It's the symbolism of being deeply engrounded in the water, and also, you know, seeking the heights. And so so Saturn, you know, when we talk about Saturnalia, that was a festive, you know, which is, you know, now become Christmas, was really a festival of the dark nature god, you know, associated with Saturn. So I associate Devil's Club with Saturn as well.
Uh-huh. That's interesting. Uh, yeah. Yeah. I can see that. And it certainly, you know, it gives stamina, which Saturn has a lot to do with stamina. You're going to stay the course. You're going to endure. even if it's hard, even if it's not comfortable, you're going to do this because this is your task and you're going to stick to it. So, you know, it certainly brings that element. And yeah, that association with the devil, that's very interesting. It reminds me of a number of years ago, I think just after you came and visited us, and I was having a more intense period of dreaming and getting things going on a level with my work, and having to figure out where I was going to go. And yeah, my dreams were kind of intense. I can't remember the specifics of them at the time, but at the same time, I realized when I was having these intense dreams and I was experiencing this, we were going through the full moon of it was in January, and the full moon was in Cancer, and the sun in Capricorn was, so it was like the full moon of like the sun in Capricorn, the moon in Cancer, and they're on this axis, the Capricorn Cancer axis. And I was out for a walk in our field, and I saw this big moon rising, and there was a great horned owl that was in this, sitting on the edge of this tree. And as I started walking closer, I noticed it because it flew from one tree to another tree. And then, and so I saw it because I hadn't seen it. And then it was just sitting and standing at the edge of the branch of the tree and looking down. And as I walked by, and the full moon was up, and it just felt so powerful. And I don't run into great horned owls all the time. And it wasn't nighttime yet. Like, it was getting to be, the moon was rising, but it was not dark out. And I thought, okay, this horned owl, it's got the horns that are like Capricorn, the same horns, which are also kind of like the devil associated with Saturn. And Capricorn rules Saturn rules Capricorn, and the full moon was taking place right on my natal Saturn, which is in the sign of Cancer. So the full moon was in Cancer on my Saturn, and then there was the reflecting energy of the sun in Capricorn. And this owl with these horns, it was like these messages were coming through so strongly to me that I needed to just get systems in place that would allow me to move forward, and like ground some of my Piscean Neptunian energy, and allow me to move forward in a way where I could bring my visions for the work that I'm here to do into a more grounded, usable place. And the wisdom of the owl, you know, I feel like that brings so much wisdom. But yeah, then that it was right on my Saturn, it was like, okay, come on. A Saturn placed in Cancer is not a very strong, it's a challenged Saturn, and my Saturn happens to be retrograde in Cancer, so even more. But this was like, no, you're bringing it all together, strengthening this, and that was big medicine for me at the time. That was really important.
Far out.
Yeah.
You know, the ability of the owl to see in the dark, you know, it's a very Saturnian,
Mm.
you know, you know, we see in the tarot, a card that I associate is the what is it, the wise old man, not
Oh, the Hermit, or
the hermit. Yeah, the
yeah.
hermit is if you know, if you pull the hermit's dress, you know, usually you know, he learns it wears a cloak, but if you pull his cloak up, you'll see he has cloven foots. He's the devil. He's Saturn also, but he carries the lamp.
Okay. Is it
And
the
so,
Hermit or is it the Hierophant? It might be the Hierophant.
what's that?
The teacher, the Hierophant. It's like Chiron. No, maybe it's different.
But
I
the
don't know.
Hierophant is, you know, it's more like Pope, like, you know,
Uh-huh.
you know,
So it's the Hermit.
the hermit is, you know, lives in the dark, carries the lamp
Right.
of knowledge, you know, and he's associated with the devil as well. But very interesting. And then also, I guess, Raven medicine also, huh, would be crow, raven would be also associated with Saturn.
I would think so. There's a, yeah, I mean, the connection to, well, the dark color for one, because Saturn is black, it would resonate with the black color. And then that they fly, but they come down to Earth to get their food, and they're feeding off of the dead. They're not taking more life. They're being very efficient with eating the dead and recycling that. And so that's another aspect of it. Yeah, I mean, they bring warnings. They kind of, they're good warning birds. So, there's danger ahead. Be wise, be aware, like be fearful, maybe, which fear comes with Saturn, which, has been very accentuated, the fear over this period. We didn't get into that, but
A Saturnian fear is a wise fear, and
right.
Neptunian fear is like, that's the victimization kind of fear. That's much, a Saturnian fear is I'm gonna get my ducks in a row and I'll be prepared. I got to get to work. I got to work on what, like the I Ching, work on what has been spoiled, that's a Saturnian fear. And Neptunian fear, floods consciousness, and it's just it's a victimization. It's not it's a different kind of fear.
It's an illusion.
It's an illusionary fear. Your fear about something that you confront every day. The
Ah,
reality of crossing the street. You could be afraid of crossing the street, but if you look both sides and you know what you're doing, you're gonna be okay. It's irrational fear. Saturn is not irrational. Saturn is so the Saturnian fear is get your shit together fear. Neptunian fear is, I need to be contained. I need my father, I need the state to tell me what to do. It's a different type of fear.
well, I feel like they can be expressed in so many different ways, because the Saturnian fear can be excessive too, and it can prevent you from having experiences that might really benefit you, but because you're wanting to be really, because you're more fearful, you're not going to do it, because it is maybe taking a risk, but at the same time, uh, it would be interesting to talk about, actually, how does fear show up in all that, like you were talking about, you know, Mars feeling victimized by these authorities, and then rebelling, like, and what is the fear of Mars is like this innocent, like childlike kind of fear, that and sometimes it's like, oh, I'm afraid, but I'm going to do it anyway because it's exhilarating, the fear.
Yeah.
And then the fear within, how it shows up, and like how these emotions that move through all of us, how they would show up through the different planets. That would be an interesting conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I have Saturn in the middle of the sky in Capricorn, so
Yeah,
that's
you have
it's the kind of fear that makes you stronger. It's the kind of fear that you're always facing. It's an invitation to mastery of fear, which is a much different,
right.
experience. It's been delightful. It's like time flew here. That was so much fun.
Yeah, I don't know how long we've been, but it's been a while probably. And
A little bit.
it is fun. It's always fun to get into these chats. And so we'll have to do it again. We can invite,
Absolutely.
yeah, we can invite anybody who has any ideas in terms of like stuff that might want to be discussed, that where we might go. You want to hear what we might say about fear manifesting through the different planets, or anything else?
I think that as we get going, now I'm going to do a playlist on my channel, because now we have 2 videos, but I think that we need to do the promotion thing, the Saturnian thing. My channel is the Healer and the Dreamer Astrology, and please subscribe. And then hello. Your channel is
Hawthorne Herbals.
Herbals with an S,
Hawthorne Herbals,
Tamara's.
yeah.
And then they can connect to us. How do they connect with you? You have hawthorneherbals.ca.
.com.
.com, and then I have healerdreamerastrology.ca, and then same email address for me at Gmail. So reach out. I've had some of my clients and some of my followers ask about your information. I don't know if you got any feedback.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had a few people who said that they tuned in and they really enjoyed it, and they were wanting to know more about the work that you do, which I was excited to talk about. So yeah, it's a good sharing. I think, you know, there definitely is some cross pollination that can be possible here a little more, and you know, us Piscean Canadian astrologer herbalist folks are, you know, there aren't that many of us, so we got we got stuff to say from our
it's
our own
very
perspective.
In my perspective, that's what the, you know, what the antidote for the future is this really strong sense of cross-pollination, of feeling community and building community and being united and sharing our arts and our practices to strengthen our community, because as you well know, these are not easy times.
They're interesting times.
Fascinating. I've integrated more realizations about astrology myself in the last 2 years, and my Saturn's really become, you know, really empowered by this. I'm way more disciplined, way more committed, way more to the detriment of my like I was sharing that dream, you know, the eagle is taking the little kitty up in the air, you know, so my little kitty, my inner vulnerability is really challenged by having to really be so serious about showing up in these times. And so it's I think all of us have to look after ourselves. So important, huh?
Definitely. Yeah. So, you know, if you can go for a walk and hang out with an oak tree, that might be good medicine. And yeah, journaling, recording your dreams, maybe following your astrology, Devil's Club, dandelion root,
Dandelion
nettles.
Drew. I just bought at the farmer's market a beautiful jar of dandelion, you know, coffee, just a dandelion root powder
Yeah.
that the person did in a beautiful mason jar there. So it
Beautiful.
reminded me of that, and I'll start drinking that every morning.
Yes, enjoy. That's
And
great.
I also have Devil's Club tincture that somebody gave me, so I'll start having a little bit of that every day.
Beautiful. Wow. Yeah, thank you for bringing Devil's Club in. That's a that's some magic sacred medicine there that I don't, it's not always at the, you know, top of my head because I'm not surrounded by it here. So yeah.
Well, it was a great fun hanging out with you, and I look forward to the next time.
Yes, me too. Sending big love out to the masses.
And big love to Chris and
All right.
to your beautiful land there, and I look forward to visiting soon.
It will be lovely. Okay, good. And love to Annie. Okay.
Well,
See you next time.
woohoo!